As a relationship therapist, here's what I've come to know. Fighting is healthy. There are some ways to communicate that help relationships endure, and other types that shut them down. There's resolution and repair. That's the stuff that matters. I'm really good at repair, because this is the story that I know best. However, I didn't learn these lessons in school, postgraduate training, or my 15 years of clinical work. The greatest lessons I ever learned were from my grandparents. Grandpa Ismar and Grandma Erica taught me everything that there is to know about love, loss, repair, and endurance. As a relationship therapist, I also do a much better job of holding other people's stories than telling my own. For a long time, I didn't want to admit to having my own messes. I'm not so comfortable sharing my shadows. But they're unavoidable. They're human. So here goes. I'm drawing a bath for my daughters, and my phone dings with a forwarded email from my mother. Her irritating "have a nice day" signature is the opening line. Below is an email from one of my father's long-removed cousins, the daughter of my grandfather's only surviving yet estranged brother. The email is about my grandfather's dark side, the side that I knew nothing about. When I was a little girl, life with my grandfather was full of love. He was a sweet, tender, gentle man. He and my grandmother were the owners of a gourmet grocery store in Providence, Rhode Island. At 3 years old, my grandfather lifts me up with his loving arms so that I can sneak raspberry and blackberry candies from the wire baskets that hang overhead. Even though he helps me, it feels sneaky. He's my co-conspirator. The first time I remember asking, I'm 5 years old. The Providence store has been sold, and they've moved to Pembroke Pines, Florida. We are sitting in a flower print swivel club chair in a mirrored living room. It's the early 80s. I sit on his lap and I cuddle into him and trace the green tattooed numbers 106751 on his left forearm with my index finger. Over and over, just the same as I locate each freckle on his arm. These are his markings. I know them by heart. Perhaps what I know more than anything is the love that I feel sitting in his lap as I trace. This is my safe space. Grandpa, what do these numbers mean? These numbers, he tells me this time and countless times to come, are my story, and you are my reason for living. These are big words to land on the shoulders and in the heart of a child still small and innocent enough to nestle into Grandpa's lap for a journey into all the stories that follow all the whys that I so naturally provoke him with. He tells me he has so many stories in him, but he's promised me not to share most of them with me. You don't need to know it all, he says gently. He can't bear for me to. After all, I'm his reason for living. Over the years, he tells me his stories in small bursts. About how the family was separated immediately after getting off the cattle cars at Auschwitz. One of my grandfather's brothers was carrying their invalid father, a World War I hero, followed by his mother and 2 sisters. When they arrived, they were all sent to the left. My grandfather, on his own, was sent to the right. He survived. Later that day, he asked another prisoner when he'd see his family again. The prisoner responded by shouting to him, "Look up, you see that smoke? There they are." And so he knew, not even 24 hours after entering the camp, he knew what was in store for them. He also shared so many stories about liberation. My grandfather and his 2 buddies, who he bonded and survived together with in the camps, went looking for a sister who they heard had survived at Bergen-Belsen. They didn't find her. Instead, they met 3 women, among them my grandmother Erica. The women were still living in the camp when they met, The men told them that they'd be back when they had a place for them to live, and then they'd marry them. The women laughed. Who were these men? These 3 newly liberated men used their moxie and somehow managed to obtain new suits from a local shopkeeper and then came back to woo the women. Again and again, each time in new suits. In no time, the 3 couples married. Girls my age had princesses, but I had liberation as my love story. But now I learn from this unexpected email that despite all that my grandfather has shared, there were many things I didn't know about his dark side in the concentration camps. My cousin shares stories that my grandfather never told me about how he survived, while my girls dance around the house, creating a ruckus and avoiding bath and bedtime. I read on. She shares that the reason her father, Artur, and my grandfather were never able to repair their relationship. She tells me that her father didn't talk about the concentration camp until she sat him down at the age of 93. It was then that he told her that my grandfather was a kapo at one of the camps. A kapo is a Jewish guard working for the Nazis. Arthur never forgave my grandfather for that. Grandpa Ismar asked Artur if he should have been killed instead. He told him yes. Of 12 siblings, Artur was one of the few that survived. My grandfather was a kapo. In all the stories that he shared, I never heard this before. I hand off the phone to my husband so that he can read what I just had, so that he can know where my mind is whirling off to. And I attempt to corral the girls into the bath. The little one bites me. She leaves a mark on my arm. I'd like to say that she never does this, but her sister nicknamed her Gator for a reason. Still, this is extreme. It hurts. I hold the bite mark. It's right where my grandfather's numbers were. I'm so overwhelmed. This is not what I thought motherhood was going to be. I thought it would fulfill me, but I feel like I'm failing. I feel full of my own unmet needs and defined by the needs of others. I wasn't ready for all of this. The blur between the girl's actions and my inner whirling gets heavier. I'm trying to understand, is she triggering me or am I triggering her? I take a seat on the edge of my bed. The little one runs from Daddy, upset with herself for biting me and with me for not attending to her pain, and she tosses herself dramatically naked on the bed next to me. Mama, when I grow up, I'm gonna live far away from you, I think, 'cause you don't hear me. It reminds me of the time that I was so angry at my grandmother that I yelled in her face, "I hate you." She replied, and this moment is ingrained in the essence of who I am. I know, Mama Lashina, and still I love you. I will always love you. With my daughter's words, I sink back into my body, out of my head. This child is whirling in the mess of trying to understand it all with me without any words spoken of my experience. My daughter is so much like me. Both of my daughters are. I hug her. I have no words, but hers were plenty. My husband puts the girls to bed that night as I think about all I've just learned and all that's just happened. My husband is my reason for living. This life we have built, this family, these relationships may be taking away all the things I thought I was and making me into this new being full of feeling, but they are my reason. After reading about my grandfather, I find myself asking, who was he? Did I know him? Of course I did. I know how I experienced him. He was security and safety. He believed in me more than anyone, and he had a dark side. I do too. We don't simply thrive. That's rarely a human experience. I know this intimately as a therapist, and yet I'm not so gentle with myself in my own inner dialogue. I can be harsh when reflecting on my own shadows. It's a much bigger struggle for me to find compassion and forgiveness for my own shadows than for my grandfather's or anyone else's. There is no information about my grandfather's past that could ever change who he was to me. 22 years after his death, I still find myself calling on that belief to hold me through my own shadows, to carry me through the trials and messes of partnership and parenting and life. I lie here next to my husband with our girls tucked into their beds after a hard night, and I marinate on one of my favorite love stories, passed down from my grandparents to Holocaust survivors who rebuilt their life on the somehow theory, that somehow, if you believe enough, if you hope enough, it'll work out, no matter how hard it is.